Started. I would like to thank everybody for joining us here relatively early on a Saturday, although these days it can be difficult to keep track of things like days of the week and hours. We're thrilled to be here with you. We're going to be talking about artist team building. The panel is quite excellent, and to kick things off, I would like to give everyone an opportunity to introduce themselves, and let's start with Emily.
Thank you. My name's Emily White. I'm a co-founding partner at Collective Entertainment. I'll let my business partner, Melissa, speak to that as she's on our panel. I'm the founder of #iVoted, where we activated over 150 venues for the 2018 midterm elections in 37 states to let fans in on election night who show a selfie from outside of their polling place. We are doing the same for November 3rd, and I have gotten, just really quick, we've received more responses from venues over the past 2 weeks than we have all year. I was personally shocked by that because obviously they are crushed with cancellations and the work of reschedules and things like that, but it's been really inspiring to see that they really want to get active and get involved with the election. I'm also the author of the #1 bestseller on Amazon for new releases in music business. It's called How to Build a Sustainable Music Career and Collect All Revenue Streams. And my first book is called Interning 101.
Excellent. Thank you, Emily. Melissa, would you like to follow?
Sure. As Emily mentioned, we are co-founders of Collective Entertainment, an entertainment management firm that specializes in music and sports. I have a master's degree from NYU in music business, and during that time I developed a passion for artist management. I actually started off as an intern for Emily when she was running Whitesmith Entertainment. Flash forward to today, now working together side by side. It's been a really amazing experience. During that time at NYU, I developed a passion for day-to-day management, tour management, immersed myself in social media and marketing, learned so much, and took on my first ever management client named Fox Stevenson, who we worked on together along with our amazing co-manager Han Kim. And today it's now been a 7-year management relationship that's been going on very strong and something that I'm very truly proud of. Since then, I've taken on other clients, including dance artist Trivecta, indie artist Taurus, and I also manage a professional skydiving team called the Factory Team, which is basically managing like a boy band. It's a lot of fun, but altogether, Collective Entertainment represents not only musicians, but athletes. And on my side, I focus primarily on skydiving in terms of the sports side of the company. Emily focuses more on the swimming side because her background is swimming. She went to college for swimming, et cetera, et cetera. We don't have to go into too many details on that, I guess. But we're really proud of our very unique and strong roster and focus a lot on building, a strong team around our artists and working together to, follow through on their visions and connecting with their fans.
Very cool. Thank you, Melissa. Miriam, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, of course. Hi, everyone. My name's Miriam. I am a graduating law student at Hofstra Law. I actually also went to Hofstra for undergrad, but I wasn't part of this awesome organization. I was actually more in the business law route than music law. I didn't know it existed back then, but I have a performing arts background. I went to high school for vocal. I went to LaGuardia High School. And my whole time in that process, I always found it so fascinating how my school was able to put on performances of Chorus Line, Guys and Dolls, In the Heights, like all these awesome Broadway shows. And that's when I learned like what licensing was and copyright and trademark and all that. So from high school, I was able to kind of gear my future into going into entertainment law. I love singing, but I never really wanted to make that my career. I'm a little stubborn in that sense. And then since being in law school, I've interned at AMC Networks, which is the television network. And I interned at Sony Music for about 3 semesters. Most recently, I was at an IP law firm called Lattice & Perry. So I've put my foot in a ton of different puddles, I should say. That's about me.
Very cool.
I should also preface, I'm not a lawyer, so anything I say is all my opinions and not legal advice.
An important disclaimer. Dana?
Hi, I'm Dana. I do streaming and marketing at indie label Anti-Fragile Music. It's based here in New York City. I've been here for 1 year, and then before that I was in Nashville at a boutique playlist pitching firm, streaming promotions, and before that I managed various different festivals.
Very cool. And last but certainly not least, a fellow who I met on a CMJ panel 15 years ago or so, Ed Gold.
Hello. So I'm Ed Gold. I run a business management firm doing bookkeeping, accounting, financial analysis, and planning for artists. It's 15 years now that it's been my own company, and I've been in finance and music for a lot longer than that. We work with artists on everything from paying their bills on the most basic part to budgeting their tours, doing all the tour accounting, and then helping them get ready for their tax work. Times like these have changed a lot of what we do. I've spent a lot of time this week helping apply for grants and loans, and dealing yesterday trying to get everyone payroll protection plan applications done. And I think that highlights a lot of the relationship I have with my artists, which is, anything financial that comes up for them, they come to me, and I go through it. Sometimes in normal operations, that's working with managers and booking agents to process the financial implications of tours, of contracts, so on and so forth. And then on the personal level, it's, we need to apply for a mortgage, and it's, they don't understand that I don't get a paycheck because I'm a musician. So working with the lenders on things like that, setting up insurance for them, all that sort of soup to nuts. I often describe it as the role that we play on the team is as the CFO of the artist's company. The artist is the owner. They've got a chief operating officer and a manager. They've got their legal person, and then they've got their CFO.
Right on. Thank you for that, Ed. I'll introduce myself briefly. My name is Jason Spiewak. I run JLS Artist Management and an indie label called Noble Steed. We've been around since 2013. Prior to that, I ran a Warner Music distributed label called Rockridge Music, served as that company's president for 8 years. Prior to that, worked at a couple of large indie labels, Artemis Records and TVT Records. And prior to that, I was in a band. And so have seen this process and sort of the aggregation and deconstruction of team building for artists from a few different perspectives. And so I think it might just be good to get this conversation started with a very common type of question for those who are interested in artist team building. At what point in an artist's career should they really start to think about team building, and how and when is it important to bring others in to help someone build their business? Who wants to jump on that grenade first?
Me, please, if that's okay.
Please.
Okay.
Thank you.
So that's actually the last chapter of my new book.
Perfect.
Because I feel that there are so many things that artists can do on their own, even in this crazy time. I wrote the book even for artists that are unable to tour, if they're not able-bodied, if they're a single parent. So there's so much that can be done on one's own. And it was actually, I believe at this conference maybe 2 years ago, I was on a panel with a few major label people, and they were totally agreeing, right? They want to see great art. They want to see fan engagement. It's not necessarily, well, it can be numbers, but obviously if the art isn't great, then
Sure.
we're going to notice that the numbers are inflated. So yeah, everything we're going to talk about today is actually how you build an artist team, because we're human beings. We're not necessarily miracle workers. And so many people in the industry have had to educate themselves on the modern music industry. So yeah, Don Passman's book starts with how to build an artist team, chapter 1. Mine is your artist team is like chapter 12. So yeah, there's so many tools you can build up your career and then build a team from there. And really, really quick, as some people know, I came up in college managing a band called the Dresden Dolls.
Right.
If you are a musician who has a student around you, I know there's a lot of great students here, who's on a professional track, don't discount that person, because working with someone like Jake, you might be too busy to take anyone on right now, so you might have the fantasy of the super, experienced manager on the 50th floor or whatever. But don't discount someone professional around you as long as they're on a professional track. Sorry, my Apple Watch was talking. Because you don't want a sycophant around you. So don't discount the enthusiastic, professional music business student around you.
That's very good advice. Anyone else care to weigh in on that thought? Thank you, Emily.
Yes, I would like to. I find that, especially when bands reach out to us and we get solicited a lot for work, some of the things that we look for generally when it comes to bands or even solo artists is what are the things that you've done to further your own career on your own, because that truly does set the tone for a future management relationship. Because if you can be self-sufficient, if you already understand a lot of the nuances that come into play when it deals with, distributing your music or connecting with your fans, then your manager or, whoever else you want to add onto the team can build from there. But I find that the most successful artists are the ones that do take the onus upon themselves to educate themselves, become familiar with their rights, and also become familiar with how the industry works, because then they can take a stronger ownership of their career. And with all the tools that we have available at our disposal, any person who has the talent, who has the music, who has the drive, can start to build their career from ground zero first and foremost, and then go on to the next step to build their team.
Absolutely. Anyone else want to weigh in? Go ahead, Ed.
Yeah, so specifically about the role that I play, I find that we're often sort of the last team member to join, and I think that makes sense. I've always found that, an artist tends to find a manager first that sort of quarterbacks a lot of the planning for the team. Lawyers are extremely important, especially whenever there's any contract. I've gotten in place where, when I've come on board and the contract that the artist has with a label or whatnot is just so onerous and so terrible because there wasn't a lawyer going through it who had knowledge of the field. Booking agents when you're getting ready to tour. And most of the time when a client is coming to me, it's through a manager, it's through an agent or a lawyer. And it's because things are starting to really take off financially. And it's getting to the point where they want to make sure they're doing the right things with their money or handling it or accounting for things properly. And so I find often, people will call me and I'm happy to give advice on very simple things about why don't you set this up right now, even if you're not hiring a business manager. Here are the things to do in terms of properly setting up the company, properly accounting for your taxes and things like that. And then when things grow and there's more money and you need somebody to actually handle the money is when someone like me or a business manager tends to get involved.
Right. I think that's an excellent point. And, in the interest, knowing our audience, MEISA is so forward thinking in terms of trying to actively research and understand the industry. It might just be cool to share a bit about what our day-to-day work looks like. What does an average day, if there is such a thing? I mean, I'll speak for myself. No 2 days really look alike as an artist manager. There are certain systems and processes in place that are predictable, like advancing a show or dealing with a promoter or trying to set up radio opportunities or working with a publicist and so on. I mean, some of these things sort of become predictable facets of the business, but it's very difficult to know what an individual day might look like in terms of the specific work. So anyone want to share their day-to-day? Okay.
And sorry, our esteemed manager is Jason. I called you Jake. I think I was combining Ed Gold with Jake Gold and you as a manager. And it's Saturday.
Hey, look, this is, I appreciate you correcting yourself because fact checking has become quite in vogue these days. Yeah.
So we work pretty hard at structuring our days. And we do that so we can have some flexibility, right? So personally for me, Mondays, I do try to keep relatively open, clear that inbox, get my thoughts together, get organized, things naturally come up. I have some regular artist and client and label calls on Tuesdays and Wednesdays. Right. When we're allowed to see people, I tend to do that. I tend to do in-person meetings on Wednesdays and Thursdays. It's always my dream to take Friday afternoon off. It never happens. I feel like that's when every deal gets closed and everybody comes back to you. But yeah, I do think structure is important. And I know for us, weekly calls with our clients helps a lot.
Right on. Dana, do you want to weigh in on that one?
Yeah. So for me, doing marketing and streaming at a label, it's such a small label. So every day is really different, and I'm juggling a lot of different tasks. But every week, about a couple of times a week, I'm checking on data analytics. I think that's a really big, important part, is to just keep up to date. There's so many different ways I check. I check Chartmetric, I check our distributor InGrooves, I check Pandora's Next Big Sound, and then just looking at the Spotify for Artists backend, the Apple Music backend. So I always make sure to check all those at least a couple of times a week to see what's working or what's not working. And then on the streaming side, I'm always dedicate like one morning a week to just pitching playlists. I do a lot of third-party playlist pitching. So that would be playlists that are not Spotify editorial. They're not owned by a major label or a major brand or anything. So it could be owned by a blog, or it could be just like you or me have a cool playlist that people like for some reason, and so I'll be hitting you up. And then of course there's always a lot of project management on the marketing side. So that's making sure timelines are met, making sure we have artwork and creative and videos made and lyric videos, making sure our releases are all submitted 4 weeks in advance at least. And then it could also be coordinating with our publicists or hiring another publicist for different projects. We have sometimes we'll hire different outside publicists who have different specialties for different projects. So yeah, I think that's
yeah, and that's really helpful. And also just to kind of underscore or highlight something that's implied in what you're saying, there are a lot of people that you're interacting with and a lot of resources that you're pulling information from. And so I think a good team member operates in that way. You're communicating with other people. You're not just taking the information that you have and putting it into a vacuum. You're a part and working collaboratively and sharing and trying to grow ideas and look for opportunities. That's something that a good artist team will do, is communicate regularly within itself.
Totally.
And so we should jump back to legal for just a second, Miriam, because Ed touched on contracts. Yeah, I'd love to get your thoughts on what's been said so far or something else.
So every place that you would be as an attorney is very different. If you're working for a bigger label, obviously your priority is that company. So for example, I was working at Masterworks, which is a smaller label at Sony Music. And obviously the further goal for us is to advance Sony's career just as much as Masterworks' career. But at the same time, if you're a private attorney who's working with individual clients, you have different goals. Then you also have attorneys who are working towards changing the law. So we have Adina Lapolt, for example, who is a trailblazer in the legal field, especially in entertainment, who did the Music Modernization Act, who was advocating for songwriters to get benefits from the CARES Act that was just passed. So depending on where you go as an attorney in the music field, you can do a lot of different things. So when I was at Sony, I know our weeks were very different every time. There were a lot of mergers and acquisitions happening. So when that goes on, you may have to shift what your priorities are. So Mondays used to be our priority meetings, and everyone from the team, from A&R and business and legal affairs, would sit together and be like, okay, what are you working on this week? Is there anything that you need help on? The head of our label would also be sitting in on those meetings. Later on in the week, the whole label would have production meetings for about 2 to 3 hours where they would talk about everything from PR to the photo shoots that were going on to what new releases were happening. So though attorneys are really working on contracts and negotiating and maybe seeing if there's any clauses that need to be changed or whatnot, they're also in the know of what's going on with all the other departments. I mean, I sat in front of my boss, who's the SVP of Masterworks, and all the other people would constantly come up to her and be like, is this legal? Do we need to pay the fees for their producer? Is this in the contract? And then that's what I would come in as the intern, and I would sift through all the contracts and read what the actual clauses were. But to go back to the point of what's important for an artist's team, I think it's important to have a lawyer, because if you're an independent artist signing on with a major company, the company's going to really want to invest in themselves less than you. Whereas if you have an attorney who's going to vouch for you, you could probably change a lot of what those clauses say in their template. For example, like Taylor Swift had to deal with her whole issue of not being allowed to re-record music. Maybe if her attorney back in the day read the contract a little bit clearer, she could have changed the years for the re-recording. There's a lot of like different nuances that come into play when you have an attorney, and you really want to negotiate every clause as you can. Sometimes they have set limits. Maybe they only do 3-year contracts and then you get the option to renew, but sometimes maybe a cost is a thing that your attorney can advocate for why you deserve more or why you shouldn't have to pay for X. So I think that's my 2 cents on that take.
Can I just add to something on that really quick?
Yeah.
So Miriam said something really important, which is you need an attorney if you are if you have the opportunity for a major agreement. And what I mean by that is a label, a publisher, even a producer, a manager agreement. I see too many artists at conferences like this coming up to me with their attorney, and that's their first team member, and they have no other things going on. So I know it's awesome to say that you have an attorney, but there's a good chance you paid them a retainer and you're paying them hourly to be there with you. So just keep in mind the team members you actually need and when you need them, if that makes sense.
I fully agree. I think that you have to be mindful of, you can't just hire someone just to have that label part of you. You have to really do your own due diligence and hope that the person that you're hiring, whether that be your publicist, your finance person, that they really have your best interest, because you could hire someone and they can really take your career off course.
Or you just don't need them right then, you know? Yeah. So why pay $500 an hour if you don't need that member right now?
No, I agree very much with what's being said, and to try and maybe push it a little bit further, oftentimes as a sole proprietor or as, a group, if you're in a band, when you're starting out, it's not always obvious where you're succeeding. And so I think a really great asset that's available to everyone is time. If you're successful in one area in one day, that's wonderful. But if you're successful in one area for a month or 2 or 3, then it really becomes important to think about, all right, how do I grow this? And, the cliche of if you want to go fast, go alone. And if you want to go far, go together. I think it really does apply to growing success in the music business, because to a certain degree, there's value in operating quickly and finding areas where you can become successful. But then once you identify those areas, really carefully selecting people to help you grow that area can be critical, and really it can be a road to a very long and successful path in the music business. Anyone want to weigh in on that thought?
Well, I did want to say one thing about on the legal side of things. Yes. I find interesting now from a financial standpoint is down the road, once you've been, especially if you're in a group of multiple members, the idea of having an operating agreement between you is so crucial, because what I've been faced with very much so recently with one particular client is when there's a change in personnel, whether it's because the person wanted to leave or because the person was asked to leave. And then all of a sudden they're saying, well, I was a member of this band, I'm entitled to X, Y, and Z, and 1, 2, and 3. And the band is like, I don't think so. But if there's no agreement that lays it out, that can be a real issue. And it's one of those things, even when I talk about the financial things, that's easier to do when things are just building up. And it's important to have for down the road in those circumstances. Just something where everyone has said, we've all agreed to this. Now, I'm also learning that just because it exists doesn't mean there's not going to be the threat of a lawsuit and say, I don't care what the paper says and I'm going to take you to court. But nonetheless, it's good to always have that to fall back on. And I think that's another early step for groups to keep in mind.
I have to add to that, if that's okay. That is crucial for sure. It's a prenup, basically. Exactly. And if you truly can't afford it, which most people can in early days, have a conversation and put it down in writing via email, have both people agree. Chapter 3 of my new book is called Get Your Business Affairs Together. And I'm very hardcore about before you even enter the studio, have everybody get together, get coffee so nobody feels singled out. Your players, your producer, your engineer. If you wrote all the songs, tell them that, and say, hey, I wrote these songs. If you feel that you contributed to songwriting, or if you feel that you contribute to songwriting while we are recording, you have to bring it up now, or you have to bring it up immediately after the session. And that's very similar to the band or group agreement. Nobody likes talking about money. Nobody likes talking about this stuff, but you're making your life and your career a lot easier if you get coffee, talk about it, throw it in an email, file it away, and then hopefully you never have to look at it again. But it's a prenup. It's a lot easier to talk about when you're in love than when you're getting divorced.
It's a really good comparison.
And if I could add to that really quickly, there's also like something to think about for early developing artists doing their first recording, things like that. There's, think about the trade-off of either, say there is like one main songwriter and then a band, the work for hire versus having equity in the content. So like someone may prefer one or the other, and it's not right or wrong either way.
Well, right. And also, I think if you're unsure about what these terms may mean or what specific circumstances might dictate as right or wrong, don't be afraid to ask questions either. Oftentimes we end up getting swept away in circumstances where in early artistry, you may not know what publishing means, or you may not fully understand what, your exit from the band agreement you signed actually means when it happens. Ask questions. And if nobody has a good answer for you, then find somebody else to ask. I think there's one common thread that all the panelists really have. It's that, whatever we knew that made us successful in the music business 5 years ago, 10 years ago, I can assure you that it's different now. And we've only managed to evolve and survive in this business by asking questions and gaining outside understanding, because things really do change rapidly. And I think that there are a number of important things you can learn just by asking the right question.
Literally, and I swear I'm not this obnoxious, but everything Jason just said is covered in my book. I wrote this book, like literally chapter 5 is music publishing isn't scary or confusing and how to land a sync placement. I didn't write it to sell books. I wrote it because I was sick of explaining these things over and over to people.
Sure.
So I'm just like, here you go. Here's the info.
Well, Emily, it sounds like I'm going to be selling a few copies of your book in the next because I hate explaining that as well.
No problem.
Yeah, but thank you for that. So we'll get into Q&A here in about 15 minutes. But before we do, it might just be interesting to talk about some of the challenges that we're facing right now, aside from the large obvious one. What are we facing as challenges? And it can be caused by the Corona dilemma. I'm not saying not to discuss it, but just, what are each of you really digging in your heels on to deal with right now?
I'm going to propose Melissa speaks because she had an artist in Europe when, I don't like saying his name, but the president did the European travel ban, right? So that was some real deal artist management shit.
Yeah, please, Melissa.
Yes, absolutely. So Taurus, who was in Europe for her tour, in the midst of that travel ban, we had to get her out of there as soon as possible. It was a nightmare. It was a situation that none of us on the team have ever experienced before. And I, don't want to speak on behalf of the music industry, but I think we're all really faced with situations that are completely new to all of us. So long story short, her incredible fan base pulled together and donated thousands of dollars to get emergency flights out of Europe so that her and her bandmates could get home before they could potentially get stuck. And I have friends that are still stuck in Europe to this day, to this day. And so, making the decision to cancel the rest of the tour, get her home was definitely the right move. Coronavirus and what's happening is such a huge, huge topic, especially for, not just the artist, but the artist management team. I have to explain to people that, despite the fact that other industries are put on pause or people are working more part-time, our job does not stop. If anything, it has continued to grow. And I mean, working all throughout the day trying to problem solve, because right now we are faced in this reality that there are artists that are no longer touring, and that is a huge chunk of income that the artist doesn't get and the management team doesn't get. And so with Taurus specifically, we've had to do our research and, you know, talk to her CPA and look at all these different financial opportunities in order for her to even, you know, stay afloat and pay her bandmates who, you know, she can no longer afford to pay because she had to cancel the rest of her tour, and all these other expenses that are accruing. So, you know, in this situation in particular, not only have we been researching a lot, talking to her accountant, but we're also communicating with her fan base. And the amazing thing about the music fans, not just her fans, but fans across the world, they all can empathize and understand how this is affecting these artists, and are pulling together and donating money and supporting these live streams and getting the word out. And so, and a lot of it has been about, you know, how can we harness the fan base to help these careers stay afloat? And you know, at the end of the day, when it comes to creating music, whether you're an artist or working with an artist, it comes down to the fans. And so the main solution right now that I've at least seen with not just her, but with my other clients, is how can we tap into the fans? How can we tap into the fan base and keep their careers moving? Because after all this is done, they're still going to have careers, they're still going to have fans, and we have to keep moving forward.
Also, like, release music, you know what I mean? Like, we've had some really philosophical conversations over the past few weeks of, like, you know what? Like, if you're an artist, be psyched you have a career that you own and control, right? Like I said to Melissa, before Taurus had, you know, this new album and everything, she was a waitress, right? So if she's Mackenzie working at, you know, the Lobster joint in Greenpoint, she doesn't have a job right now, but she put out a new song, or she put out a cover on Bandcamp, and someone paid $100 yesterday for that one song, right? So it's stressful. Self-care is massively important for all of us, including artists. But yeah, I mean, there's time now to create and connect, and there's actually good things that can come. Artists are actually in a better position, even with the touring situation.
So from my
one thing to add,
better position than regular people, I mean, is what I'm trying to
just real quick, one thing to add to Emily's point, you know, because right now we're faced with a huge financial implication, but she mentioned self-care, and that actually is probably right now in my position the biggest priorities to ensure that the clients that we're working with are taking care of themselves and checking in with themselves, because I mean, we can all empathize with how stressful the situation is. And, you know, I can't have a client who's, you know, in a mental state that's not quite healthy and then ask him or her to do a live stream or to perform in front of her fans if first and foremost, you know, he or she needs to take a personal day, exercise at home, you know, take some time for themselves. And so that really ends up being the number one priority at this point.
From my perspective, you know, for my artists, there are some that have always had, you know, been living a little bit hand to mouth, or, you know, just enough to get by with their careers. And so obviously this has created a lot more stress for them. But what it's just done is it's increased the need to communicate with them about, okay, what do they have right now? What's, you know, what money do they have? What's coming up? Talking them through things that we would talk through before, but just understanding that some of those things are different. So one particular client of mine who at first was reluctant to go and do a live stream show, but was thinking about the fact that his tour was canceled, and said, okay, I'm going to bite the bullet and do this, and did it, and raised, you know, quite a good sum of money, where he could at least breathe easier. And he's like, I know I can pay my mortgage for the next 3 months. I have 3 months now to figure out what to do. Should I do, if I do another one in 2 to 3 months, if this isn't working out? You know, the fans are there to support it. I can say for sure the best part of my day is whenever any of my clients go live, and I can put it on even while I'm working. And so that definitely helps. It helps me. And so that's less financial, but in general, you know, what's happened of late is that even my clients that are financially stable, I reached out to them and said, look, I know that you've got a good sum of money in the bank and I know that you can weather this, but that does, just because you have financial security doesn't mean you don't have financial anxiety, because we don't know how long this will go. And so let's talk about any anxieties you have or concerns you have that may not come true or it may come true in the fall. How do we address it? And that's what's led to, some of these loans, the payroll protection plan that rolled out horribly yesterday, and trying to get those applications in where possible, just to help them say, look, let's pay our band members for 8 weeks and help them out if we can do that. And so that's been the change, is just making use of the new tools that are out there to help people deal with whatever their financial concerns or anxieties are. And then for the people that are lucky enough to be stable, is helping them plan for it depending on how long this might go.
Yeah, there's to underscore this conversation about anxiety and worry and depression. I think these are really relevant aspects of artist management right now, and helping artists get through is really important. One a resource that I've been leaning on is the Rockstar Advocate. Suze Polinsky has a great service for artists that are looking for, sort of emergency therapy, for lack of better words. But she coaches artists on a regular basis, and Suze is really wonderful in terms of bedside manner. And even if you don't want to go the therapy route, guided meditations are very helpful. There's a ton of really great yoga practices on YouTube. And we're all doing our best to maintain our individual sanity. And I think it's really important, again, self-care, and self-care, you put your oxygen mask on first before you help others. And I've definitely been doing my fair bit of these horrible, I'll never see them until I get to hell again, workouts on YouTube with like body weight and stuff. And it's like, I weigh over 200 pounds. When I do jumping jacks, the people nearby understand that I'm doing jumping jacks.
I can't agree with you more on that. Actually, Emily and I did an online course this week. It was a yoga course with her favorite yoga teacher. And it was really amazing because, one, we have these tools now, and two, her teacher's in New Mexico, Emily's in Brooklyn, I'm in Florida, and we all get to enjoy this experience together. So this idea of, putting that mask on first, I can't tell you how many times Emily and I have had to talk to each other, just because manager to manager, founder to founder, right. How can we take care of ourselves? Because we also have to take care of our artists. And that reminds us of the humanity of all of this, and that we're all in this together. And so, for anyone that is experiencing, anxiety, stress, depression, look to your peers, because they are there for you. Look to, these resources that Jason had mentioned. Look for these online classes, because there's ways for us to get ourselves out of it. And, it's just part of the reality of the situation that we're in, but you are not alone.
For the musicians, the student musicians, one interesting thing, a guy that I grew up with, who was a fantastic drummer, had, and still drums professionally, but not very successfully and not touring, just does a Friday afternoon happy hour drum session. And I don't think he ever gets more than 30 people on there. But it's great. And I put it on and hear him drum, and like people put in requests. Oh, can you do the opening for Toto's Rosanna, or can you do this? And like, we just listen to him groove for a little bit, and it's fantastic. And so I think any of the musicians here can think about doing that for their friends. So if you've got 20 people that tune in because you're going to do whatever you've been working on at Hofstra, or whatever you're working on for something else, people will like it and care, and it'll make their day. It'll make their, at least for the 15, 20 minutes you do it, it's well worthwhile.
Yeah, people do care. I think that's really important to remind artists right now. I had a conversation with the artist yesterday about this. We were just like, he's like very, very self-conscious about social media and how he presents himself. And I was just like, people want to hear from you. Like right now, more than ever. Yep. I feel like right now, like it's so important, and there's no way you can mess that up right now. Just being real and being you, like that's so important, and it matters to other people.
And I think for those that are insecure about posting, I've had a rule that has never steered me wrong over the past 10 years, which is I try to only post positive things on the internet. If you do that, you can't really get in trouble. The 1 or 2 times I have complained about things, it's come to bite me in the ass a little bit. So for any insecure musician, just be positive and you can't really go wrong.
Heck, I'm going to live stream me working on a spreadsheet just to cheer everyone up.
I love it.
Yeah, I've been having a hard time sleeping, Ed. If you could send me that around midnight, that'd be really helpful. Thank you.
I've got a Noble Steed royalty statement we can all analyze.
Oh my God. Yeah, that usually gets it.
I think I'd like to add one more thing about, this idea of like live streaming. If you're an artist or if you have a fan base and you're still kind of unsure or insecure about, diving into these live streaming, tools and really communicating with your fans in that way, just know that, it all adds up in a very, specific way. For example, our client Fox Stevenson, who is signed to Anti-Fragile, who we communicate with Dana on a weekly basis about, he completely dove right into live streaming on Twitch and just completely embraced it. I mean, I think he's streaming maybe 3-4 times a week now, and it's a variation of live sets as well as producing music live in front of his fans. And not only has he been able to accrue a ton of donations, I think the highest donation he got was a $3,000 donation from a fan, but his streaming numbers are up. And so Dana and I and Emily, we were all talking about that last week, looking at the streaming numbers, and there's definitely a correlation. So, think about it in that regard, that every time you communicate with your fan, that can directly correlate into other areas growing and moving forward.
I think another thing to add in this is also like the way we can support our artists is platforms like TikTok, where songs can blow up immediately and that can change an artist's career. If people just curate playlists and post them, you're streaming, you're helping the artist still accrue revenue. So even though it's not the same as buying a concert ticket and buying merch, which is probably more expensive, you're still, if you make a playlist called like Zen Vibes or something, and it's an indie artist maybe who doesn't get the same attention as like a pop artist does, you're still helping them out. So you may feel that no one wants to listen to your playlist, but some people don't like making playlists. So the fact that Dana was talking about how she goes through all these different things, I was like, she probably has great music. She probably has this whole playlist that I would love to listen to. And that's another thing. Like, I've seen a lot of my friends start posting playlists that they've made, and they call it like Quarantunes or something related to COVID. And you're making light of the situation in a little bit to make it more human and not just like, okay, now we're on lockdown. So like, that's something that I think we should consider when it comes to like our self-care. Like, if you think that making playlists is going to help calm you down, it could help calm someone else down. And at the same time, you're helping an artist get more exposure.
Yeah, I like that. And also I think it's oftentimes we fall victim to our fear voice in these moments. And so quieting that will usually lead you to figuring out the right thing. We're running into Q&A time, and so it might just be best to have people drop their questions into the text, the chat, and then we can pick them out and knock them down one by one. That may be the best way to go. I've been drinking Quarantinis on a nearly daily basis, hoping that there's a remedy for my poor kidney health at the end of all this.
While we're waiting for questions, I just want to say that, I mean, everybody is extra loving music right now, but obviously it's really stressful for artists who have releases out. Like, there were albums that came out the week of September 11th. Like, right. There's a way to communicate your art without being tone deaf. There's a way to keep going. You just want to be mindful and cognizant of what the audience is going through, but just be mindful and cognizant of what you're going through, right? So you can keep things going. Like I said, you just want to be mindful of the vibe.
There's an artist that I just started working with in the last year who was sort of rebooting her career, and she was the record came out a couple of weeks ago, and when I was catching up with her, she said she used this analogy, which is a very stark analogy, that she felt like it was a stillbirth and she felt terrible about it. And she said, I don't know what to do. This album has arrived and it's not alive. And I said, well, one of the thought I had was, it's not so much that it's a stillbirth, it's that like when everybody has, if someone has a child and they're expecting a child and it's born with some sort of challenge or disability, you don't love it any less. It's still your child, and you're going to just have to change the way you raise it or the type of care and love you put into it. So an album or a piece of music or any piece of art that's coming out in the time like this may just require a different kind of care and a different kind of love to make that project succeed. It's not something to give up on.
Yes.
And just like you wouldn't give up, again, using her analogy, on the child.
Yeah, no, I like that. And right, as you touched on, Emily, people did release records on September 11th. And I remember I was working at a record company at the time, and it did create some pretty specific challenges with radio in that moment. Like one of the artists had their single include the hook and the chorus was everyone's talking about blowing up the neighborhood.
Oh yeah.
And it's like, oh, well, we're gonna have to pivot and pick a different song.
Yeah.
So let's get into a couple of these questions here. So tips for artists self-releasing albums. I know we all have our bag of tricks. Does anyone want to offer tips for an artist that is self-releasing?
I mean, everyone should kind of be, no offense, Dana, everyone should be self-releasing.
No. I'll be the first person to say that most artists who come up to me and be like, oh, how should I get a record deal? I'm like, don't. Not yet, anyway.
So, like, tech companies have more money than anyone, you know, they have more money than any company in the world. And why? Because they have all our data, right? So one of the most powerful things about direct to consumer is knowing who your audience is. We feel very strongly about releasing music, ideally through artist websites first, through Bandcamp. You know who those fans are. You can communicate with them forever. We've been expanding into text message club lists, so we know your phone numbers as well. We really are grateful for our label and distribution partners. I was commenting to a few of our artists on our team this week, like, our artists are making money on streaming. You know, they're doing really well there. But again, you can do all this stuff on your own. So do it, make the most money possible, collect as much data as possible, and then work with someone like Dana, right? And then they can help to grow the foundation that you've built. But I don't know if it's the best use of a label's time to teach you, you know, how to collect email addresses and engage with your fans when we're sharing all that information with you on how to do it. And that's what team members are looking for.
Very cool.
Yeah,
Another question. Where do you feel an artist should start out? When an artist is starting out, where should they focus their time?
Fans. I'll let someone else talk, but that's what it's all about.
I'll echo that, and I'll say, in addition to fans, art.
Yes.
You know, there's such a push to get something into the market quickly because you can, but just because you can doesn't mean that you should.
Thank you. I'll comment on that real quick. The first chapter of my book is called Get Your Art Together. And I thought that was kind of obvious, but I taught artist management at the Clive program at NYU in the fall. And I had students who were like, get your art together. I will never forget that. And I think making music should be fun. But I think sometimes we get ahead of ourselves and want to skip to these other steps. But you're right. If the art isn't great, then you can't really, then you won't have fans.
Yeah, it's tough. It's a little emperor's new clothes, and there are varying philosophies on this, but I'm of the opinion that chances are within the first 100 to 300 songs that you write, maybe one will be worth listening to in 2 or 3 years. Like, just keep writing songs. My weekly songwriting practice has been in place since November of 2011. It's really the only way to improve, because as artistry evolves, you can only compare your art to your art, really. And so you need to have lots of examples of that, and to be able to point to certain things is like, well, this is what makes this song mine versus yours, or whatever. So here's an interesting question. What would you say is the most crucial time for everyone in the artist team?
Kim, can you clarify that question? Actually, I'll just answer it real quick, because I was like trying to understand that question.
Yeah,
after the release is out, you know, like this drives me crazy as a manager, all this setup, build up, okay, it's out. And then sometimes, no offense, the label team can kind of disperse, right? So to me, it's like, what are you thinking about the second month, third month, 6 months after a release, and how are you building into that next release? I'd like to see a little more engagement there. But I'm honestly not just saying this. When did Fox's album come out? I mean, last year. And we're
October.
doing weekly calls with Dana and Tom and Anti-Fragile. So you guys are defying that, and that's all.
Yeah.
My standpoint, it's the boring thing is tax time. This is the most crucial time for us to making sure everyone's finances are in order and they're filed. I'd say the second most is surrounding touring, which is as soon as a tour is being thought of, getting involved in budgeting so the artist can really get a sense as to, am I going to make money? How much money will I make by going out and spending this time on the road? And if I'm not going to be making money necessarily, is there label support we can be getting, so on and so forth. So I'd say other than the more mundane part of the tax returns, it surrounds the touring.
That's a good answer. I want to grab this question here from Allegra. How much do you think this new normal of live streaming will change music and entertainment? Will it stay prevalent or will it die down so we can all be close again? I think all of us are chewing on this question in some way, shape, or form. Anyone want to weigh in?
I mean, I personally, as a millennial who thrives off genuine physical human interaction, like I truly can't wait to go to concerts again. I know it's not going to be immediately when everything goes back to normal, but I can't wait to see my favorite artist on a stage again and performing in front of me versus just on my phone. So I don't necessarily think that it'll die down in any way. I think if anything, music has been on the rise again after it did dip a little bit a couple of years ago. I think we're all right now getting accustomed to our favorite artist jumping on a live stream, but when the world gets back to normal, that's not going to be our life. Like, we're not going to be still consumed in our phone. We're going to be craving to be around each other again. So I think we're going to want to go to see concerts together, go to shows together, and witness all of this with our own eyes in person versus virtually.
One of my clients is a concert promoter, a small concert promoter in New York, and what we've been talking about and what they've been learning is that given the changes that are happening, given that Live Nation apparently is not making any offers or is probably going to be switching on a lot of deals to door deals only and not guarantees, that's going to open up potentially the place for independent promoters to put on shows. Yeah. I think you're going to probably see a lot more shows in smaller venues, and so people may play what may downsize the venues they were doing because people are going to be afraid to go back to large places for concerts. So you may see that. You may see artists sort of underplaying venues, maybe doing more days at that venue. So I think that could be one change out of it. But I think from the live music standpoint, what I'm sensing from my clients is that it's going to be a very slow rebound. Everyone's rushing to get dates booked, but I know that when people are trying to get into a venue right now, they're being told you're the 16th hold or the 20th hold on this venue. So good luck getting in there on that date. So I think that's going to be one change. And I think for that reason, people's interaction with music online, streaming these concerts online, I think is going to continue for a while. And as the live music sort of takes baby steps back into it.
So let's, we're going to have to wrap up shortly. I'd love to give each of the panelists a quick parting shot, maybe 30 seconds. And then I'll tie a pretty bow on this thing. Melissa, do you want to get us started with some final thoughts on this conversation?
I guess my final thoughts are that, despite what we're faced with currently, the music industry is resilient. The music industry evolves. It's very much founded on the strength of the fan base and the strength of the music and the talent of these artists. And that it's always important to remember that, despite what we're going through as an industry as a whole, things will evolve. Some bad things might come out of this. Some positive things will certainly come out of this. And I think that we're already seeing those kinds of trends.
Absolutely. Ed?
Yeah, again, so much changes in every couple of years or 5 years or 10 years in the music industry. This will inevitably change things, but artists will still make art. There's still going to be a market for the art. How that market presents itself will all adapt to, just like changes from CDs to digital, from downloads to streaming. It'll all change again. Even if this didn't happen, it would all change again. So we go through it. The artists keep making their art. The artist team continues to support them on it. And yeah.
Right on. Mariam?
I think I'm gonna end off with some advice since I'm still a student and I know like jobs is very scary. And my biggest thing, I'm a huge networker. I think that a lot of times jobs can come from conversations with people, not necessarily applying through job boards. So if there's someone that you're genuinely interested in what they're doing, reach out to them on LinkedIn, on Instagram, on Twitter, and tell them like you admire. Oh, cute dog. Tell them you admire what they're doing, and like if they are near, well, this is if human interaction happens again. Coffee's a great thing. Zoom's a great resource. Hop on a Zoom call with them. A lot of people love giving 15 minutes to students to talk to them to further their careers because they were once in your shoes. So the worst that can happen is either someone doesn't respond, they say no, they're too busy right now. Reach back again later on, especially if you want to work with that person specifically. But there's so many people out there in this industry that love to talk about what they do and they would want to help you. So my biggest advice is don't be afraid to reach out to them.
That is really, really, really good advice. I love that. Dana?
Yeah, I think, everyone's saying like, through all of these changes, everything is constantly changing, but of course, especially right now, we still have the fan is the most important part of your career. It's that human connection. It's that personal story that person has to the music, that personal connection, and that'll never go away. I think maybe the live streams are kind of amplifying that a little bit right now, which is really cool, and kind of building more super fans this way. But a lot of times, marketing is like a really nebulous term, but it all kind of boils down to different ways to make that connection to your fans.
Absolutely. Thank you, Dana. Emily?
Create great art and take care of your fans. Collect as much as their data as possible, not to sound like a total creep. And know that you're the artist team because, like I said, we're all human beings. I've been a creator writing this book over the past year. The founder of my publishing company got divorced this year, got his startup funded. So crappy personal situation, awesome professional situation. Someone else from the publishing company left. I'm sharing all that because that's going to happen to artists, right? And you have to persevere and you have to keep going and just know that like it's your art, it's your creation. Take care of your fans, and not in a creepy way, but like the team will fill in from there. And there are some team members that will help you build that from fan one. But I think because there's so much of this information out there, create great art, engage with your fans, build it, and fill in your team from there.
Very cool. At the risk of sounding like I'm pandering, this really was one of the best and most informative panel discussions that I've been lucky enough to be a part of. It was really dope. So thank you guys all for tuning in. Thanks to Terry Tompkins and to Hofstra. Thanks to Quadio and to Allison. We appreciate your support. And I know there are other panels that are going to be taking place almost immediately. So look forward to hearing some more spirited chats today. And be safe out there. Thank you guys.